If you wanted to make a point in the ancient world, you made it in stone with a hammer and a chisel. You carved your proclamation and you placed it where everyone could see it. And you expected it to last forever. But what has this grave Stone Age technology got to do with tabloid newspapers and best-selling paperbacks?
We take books for granted these days. They're readily available on just about any subject you can imagine.
All branches of science and knowledge. Hysteria, hydraulics, human sacrifice, housing, horseshoeing.
But it wasn't always like this. Rather, modern mass production book and newspaper printing is founded on 18th and 19th century breakthroughs. Speed of printing presses was one advance, but before any of that came a massive improvement in quality.
Look at this book. It was printed in 1669. It's beautiful, yes, but the printing's smudged. Page is very crinkled, and you can actually see the impression of the reverse on this side. Look at this. This is an edition of the Aeneid by a printer called John Baskerville. Look how clear it is, how well proportioned. It even feels nice. It's beautiful. When it first came out in 1757, it was revolutionary. People had never seen anything like this. It showed how books could be beautifully made, accurately printed, and easy to read.
Baskerville was born in 1706 in the marvellous county of Worcestershire. Early in his life he worked in stone carving, making inscriptions for headstones and such like. And it was the clarity and precision of these beautifully carved letters that inspired Baskerville to change printing.
They are open, expansive and very legible. They're designed to be seen from a distance, unlike the cramped, labour and space-saving monkish and scribal handwritings. Baskerville realised that if he could utilise this stone letter style, it could set a new benchmark for the quality of printed letters or type.
So Baskerville set about designing new fonts based on stone carving, and some of them are still in use today, such as the eponymous Baskerville font. Other printers copied his example, and the world of crisp, modern fonts was born. The newly designed fonts were cast using the age-old method with hot lead. Baskerville took great care to ensure that each letter was cast to exactly the right size, so it always pressed down exactly the right amount on the paper. But it's no good getting your type right if your paper's rubbish.
The first thing you need to make paper is a good water supply, which is why paper's always been made here at Wookey Hole in Somerset, because the water that filters through the limestone mendips and carves the caves is completely acid-free. Perfect for paper. To make it, you start off with these rags. You're after the cotton fibres. They would employ women and children in buildings like this for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, 2 and 6 a week, thanks, to cut the rags up. What you get then is cut up rags.
The rags, caustic soda and water are then mixed in this big vat.
This would have been sealed and the whole thing would have been churned round and round and round by this gearing, like a great big washing machine, breaking down and bleaching all the cotton, ready for the next stage of the process. Here at the Wookey Hole paper mill, they've been making paper in the traditional way since 1610. But nowadays, rags are full of man-made fibre, so they're no good for making paper. You have to use this, cotton. It's in a pure form, it's in sheets. And it goes into this marvellous machine, the beater. Guess what it does?
The beater's like a giant food processor. Knives slice up the sheets of raw cotton into a porridge. It might look fun, but getting exactly the right consistency is a highly skilled job. Too much or too little cotton and the paper batches ruin you. In Baskerville's day, beating would have been done by hand, but he took great care to get the very best mix.
That is now at the correct consistency. From the beater, the mixture's fed into here. Look, cotton soup. 200 gallons of cotton soup. We're now ready to make paper. This is a mesh frame. This is what you actually make the paper on. Baskerville realised that if he made the mesh interlocking, if he put the warp and the weft of the mesh through each other, he could make a much finer finish to his paper. Previously, they'd just been laid across each other in a slightly haphazard manner. This is at the right consistency. Put this into the vat like that. That's terrible.
Then, very charitably, considering the quality of my sheets, Sid here couches for me. That means he turns out each sheet and lays a felt across it until the whole lot is ready to be pressed and dried.
So, some member of the Royal Academy is going to open their parcel of beautiful handmade paper from the Wookey Hole paper mill and go, who the hell made this?
When you've made 200 sheets, you take them to the wet press, where 1.5 tons of pressure drives out the water.
The pressed paper is then brought here to the drying loft. With all these beautiful wooden racks, which are all down here, because obviously there's no point taking damp paper, carrying it up a ladder. You lay it carefully on these racks, and then using the ladders all around the frames, you walk these frames up and peg them where you need them, and there's plenty of space.
The paper takes about 2 days to dry out here, thanks to the constantly circulating warm air.
Finished, perfect, ready for the press. Baskerville took great care with his printing. We know this because when you look at his books, all his letters leave a perfectly clear impression. He never used worn out type, and he took great care with this part of the process, the actual printing. Then aligning the paper up, put that on there, so that's going to receive the impression, pack that out. And then roll that into the press. Then I pull this lever to make the impression. That's called a pull, which of course has nothing to do with making oneself attractive to young ladies. Do you see? Right, there we go. This, of course, will be nothing like the standard of the exalted man's work, but it demonstrates the principle of letterpress printing. Remove the packing. Lovely Wordsworth sonnet.
Baskerville's work was much admired and copied. His books, it was said, astonished all the libraries of Europe. But his life was dogged by controversy.
He managed to astonish his contemporaries by living in sin for 25 years with a married woman, Mrs. Sarah Eves. He was also a committed atheist, and when he died he refused to be buried in a churchyard, but was interred in a vault under his house. 50 years after his death, though, his house was knocked down and he was accidentally dug up and buried in a churchyard.
But whatever his opinions, Baskerville did set a new standard for printing, one that we all take for granted today. He produced well-made, durable books that were easy to read and looked good, the sort of thing, in fact, that appealed to everyone.
We are used to a mass of information being available through books and periodicals, and this was made possible by a 19th century revolution in printing. Printers got busy. History of cricket, Trevor Bailey. I'm stuck in Yorkshire up here, I'm never going to get out. Pride and Prejudice, Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged. In 1813, Jane Austen published Pride and Prejudice with an initial print run of 1,500 copies. By 1860, Dickens' novel Great Expectation was published in editions of 100,000 and circulated to the bookshops and libraries of novel-mad Victorian Britain.
All this was made possible by a printing boom. More people than ever before wanted books on all manner of topics.
Fit After 40 by Clement Jeffrey. Getting through the winter. Good-o!
To meet this unprecedented appetite for the printed word, printers large and small sprang up all over the country.
Robert Smale's printing shop in the Scottish border town of Innerleithen was typical. And for anybody with a very slight stationery fetish, this is an absolute Aladdin's cave. All the inhabitants of the town, both great and small in importance, as well as local industry and shops and farmers, everybody would come here for everything they needed to be printed. Tweed manufacturers' invoices, cheese and wine dance invitations for Inverleithen Golf Club, Wendy's 21st birthday party, a dinner dance invitation at the Hydro, Peebles Ladies Golf Club, invoices, headed notepaper, the vicar's needs, all sorts of paper, all sorts of envelopes. And also, because Smale was a canny businessman and he lived in a border town, he also sold fishing tackle.
Smales would have employed a handful of highly skilled printers, most of them upstairs, here in the composing room.
First thing you need for printing is lots of daylight. Lots of windows up here, and the rafters are all painted sort of sky eggshelly blue to give a nice even daylight, because this work is close and detailed. Accuracy is paramount. Printers were called the aristocrats of labour. They were all highly literate, they served a long apprenticeship, and they were also correspondingly very well paid.
The first stage of printing is composing. The type is set, backwards of course, as it's a mirror image, on this stick.
The font of type is in this, a case, contains the upper and lower cases, capital letters and little letters. The capital letters are arranged alphabetically. The lowercase letters are arranged according to usage. Right in the middle where you want them, or you have your most used letters. And that gives rise to the expression to mind your P's and Q's, because when you're working backwards, a P and a Q will look the same, so that's why you have to be careful. Print compositors, obviously, because they were working to very hard deadlines, producing papers overnight, were known for their speed. Book compositors had to be quite learned and bookish, obviously, so as they weren't fazed by words like coruscate and hippopotamus.
The faster you composed, the more you were paid. Newspaper compositors could do over 2,000 letters an hour, for which they were paid 25 shillings. For each mistake you made, though, you were fined 1 whole shilling. Thank you very much. Next, all the composed letters were bound together in a frame and wedged tightly into place before being taken to the press. At the beginning of the 19th century, presses were made of iron and were worked by hand. But as the years wore on and printing businesses like Smale's flourished, it was time to invest in some brand new technology.
Like all industry in the mid-19th century, power-driven was the thing, and printing was no exception. Friedrich Koenig, a German, invented the first power press. What is it with Germans and presses? This is a Wharfdale from 1863 and embodies the same principles. The form passes underneath on the bed, backwards and forwards, in the same way as a hand press, but the paper goes on a cylinder. It's a cylinder press. It's much, much quicker.
These steam-powered presses were entirely automatic, except for feeding the paper in.
And the next stage was electrically powered presses, like this Heidelberg. Engage the drive. One of the very cunning things about this press is that down there is a suction pump, so we no longer have to feed the paper by hand. But the most exciting thing is this has a variable drive. So if I wind this handle, it can speed up.
Heidelbergs were so effective that some British newspapers were still being printed on them in the 1980s. German efficiency. But these fast mechanical presses showed up just how slow composing was, and it took a bit of German know-how to solve that problem as well.
This marvellous contraption is a linotype machine. It was invented in 1879 by a man rejoicing in the name of Ottmar Mergenthaler, and it was he who finally solved the problem of making a compositing machine.
At the top of the linotype is a bank of matrices. Brass moulds for casting letters of type. They fall down into the machine when you type the letters you want on the keyboard. Then, pushing this lever sets off the casting process. Inside, hot lead is poured into the moulds, allowed to cool and spat out at the bottom as a slug of type.
The story goes that he was demonstrating it to an American press baron called Whitelaw Reid. Mergenthaler pressed the keys on the machine, and when the slug came out, Reid apparently said, "Ottmar, you said a line of type," and the name stuck.
Printing was now much quicker and easier, but still books and newspapers had to be made available to ordinary people like you and me.
Better printing technology meant more books, more knowledge, but not everybody could afford to purchase those books. Great men had always had great libraries, but this became the era of the public library. Like this, the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. Clearly, one of the best things about being British.
In 1800, there were no public libraries in Britain, but by 1900, there were 295, crammed with books on ever more varied subjects.
The Pleasures of the Table by Sir Francis Colchester Wemyss. Dedicated to those charming young people of Cheltenham Ladies' College whose amiable reception in November 1929 of a disquisition on housekeeping by an elderly gentleman set a ball rolling which has reached its goal in this book.
But all that printing required a great deal of paper, and hand-making it all just wouldn't do. Something else was required.
Ever wondered where your recycled paper goes?
This is Apsley Mill in Hertfordshire. It's an industrial paper factory, and amazingly, it was first mechanised in 1803.
Here at Apsley Mill, they use recycled paper. So the first stage of the process is feeding that into this machine to turn it into crumb. It's basically what happens when you leave a paper tissue in your jeans and put it through the washing machine. Oh, a paper cut. This is crumble. The recycled paper and rags have been mashed up. It's really hot. It actually starts to ferment after a while, because what it needs to do is go in here, into the beater. Exactly the same design as the beater at Wookey Hole at the handmade paper mill. But here at Apsley, it's doing a much beefier job.
Bin after bin of crumble is added to the beater, and when the mixture is the right consistency, it's siphoned off into a tank.
After the beater, the pulp is further diluted, passed into this tank. We need this huge amount of stock because we're not going to make nice sheets of handmade paper. We're going to feed a machine with a very, very bad pulp habit.
This is the paper-making monster. It's a Fondrinier.
Designed by a Frenchman, funnily enough, and it's about to start making paper. exciting. It's a bit like being in a foundry before you pour hot metal. You've got tons and tons and tons of that pulp, and this great big machine that's just very exciting. They're about to start it off, and when they do, the paper making will be continuous, so everything has to be just right.
It's a tense moment. The paper pulp has to be fed onto the conveyor, called a decal, and passed through the rollers at exactly the right rate, or else the whole batch is ruined.
When you make paper by hand, you lower the decal into the pulp. Here, it's fed by nozzles onto the decal. On the handmade process, you put it on felt. Same here, felt. Felt rollers though, because this is continuous. Then it's fed onto these rollers. These great big rollers are steam heated, boiling hot. It goes over and under, so it dries each face, the front and the back face. And there are 18 of these rollers.
The rollers remove the excess water, producing 72,000 square feet of finished paper an hour.
Here we are. That's the 18th roller. The paper is now hard, but to compress it and give it a glaze, it goes through these final rollers that are actually compressing it. They're also adding a glaze through that water trough. It's then checked by this X-ray machine. Didn't have that in 1803 when this machine was invented. And finally, look, a roll of paper. The brilliant thing about paper is it's such a basic recipe, pulp plus water, so you can vary it endlessly. Blotting paper, brown paper, cartridge paper, watercolour paper, wallpaper. Wallpaper, in fact, was invented in 1804, 1 year after this mill was founded. And then, if you want to add something to the mix, you can. Perhaps some paper with elephant poo in it. Seriously.
Industrial paper making made all sorts of mass production paper products possible. After all, you wouldn't cover your walls in your house with handmade paper from Wookey Hole, would you?
Almost all the paper made at Apsley Mill comes from recycled products, which is a good thing, because nowadays most paper is made from wood pulp, which is a bad thing.
Our passion for print can take its toll on the environment unless we watch it. So rather than just churning out more and more regardless of what the consequences are, perhaps we should take a leaf out of Baskerville's book and think about quality, not quantity, and take a bit more care.